Hey guys, Miss McElhany here to talk to you about monetary policy. We've already talked about this graph earlier, and we talked about how this is a recession because at equilibrium, the real GDP in the economy is less than its potential. So that means there's some cyclical unemployment going on. So since this economy is in recession, we've already talked about how in the Keynesian model, we could try to fix this by boosting aggregate demand and lifting the economy out of recession. But today we're going to talk about how you could attempt to do that with monetary policy instead. And monetary policy is run by the Federal Reserve or the Fed, and they increase or decrease the money supply as needed. So the question is, in this example, what should the Fed do? Should it increase the money supply or should it decrease the money supply? It turns out they should increase the money supply. And the reason for that is that there's a whole chain reaction that gets set off by that action. If they're able to increase the money supply, that means there will be more money available to loan into the economy. If there's more supply of loans, that drives down the price of a loan, which is the interest rate. That means there are cheaper loans to consumers and businesses. That means consumers and businesses will go out and, with the loaned funds, they'll be able to buy more. So there will be more consumption and investment demand, and that will drive up aggregate demand. And remember, that's what we were looking for. So this is known as expansionary or easy money monetary policy. And you can see this guy is happy about it and probably should be because if there's a recession, he might really need the money. So again, in the graph, the way this looks, it's actually going to look exactly like expansionary fiscal policy because aggregate demand is going to increase. And that means it shifts to the right. And eventually we'll get to a point where it's at potential GDP. So that means the economy is out of recession. Okay, so if you think specifically about the details of how the Fed is actually going to manage to do this, increasing the money supply, one way, and it's probably the most important way, is open market operations. And that's when the Fed buys or sells US Treasury bonds. In this example, since it's expansionary monetary policy, it's actually the Fed is going to buy US Treasury bonds from the banks. And what happens then is, since the banks had these bonds on hand that were just investments that were going to pay off over time, they're actually now transferring those to the Fed, and in return, the Fed is giving them money that can be loaned out now. So it's actually excess reserves because it's more money than they need to meet their reserve requirement. And when the banks have excess reserves, most likely they're going to loan them out, and that increases the money supply. So that's just one way to increase the money supply. There are a couple others that I discussed in your notes, but like I said, this is the most powerful, really important way. So that sets off the chain reaction that we discussed earlier that ends up increasing aggregate demand. So that leads to this effect, which again is the same as the expansionary fiscal policy. It's just another way to get there. And in the future, we'll talk about why you would want to choose one over the other in certain cases.